Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica, also known as Meta Dev Girl, and today I am excited because I've really wanted to do this for a very, very, very long time. This has been a very personal goal of mine. The Crawl, Walk, Run show or podcast, however you want to call it. And finally today, amidst all of the technical difficulties and everything else, this is the kickoff. So, I want to start out and talk a little bit about what is the goal of this show overall? What kinds of things do I want to talk about here? And then today, the main thing that I really want to cover as far as like some helpful content that I thought, might be a good place to start is kind of reflecting on the time that I have been a developer for now, or actually I would, really actually call myself a software engineer at this point. Um, how did I get here? And what were like some of the key tips along the way that, some things I learned, some things I wish I had done differently, and overall, just things that I think I get this question a lot from people. Um, you know, like how do you grow, how do you get that first job and things of that nature. So that is the topic that I want to cover today. And so again, I really want to go through, I have like 10 tips that I actually came up with. I have a list. And so I'm going to go through 10 different tips that I think has been helpful for me when it came to growing my career as a developer, and things that I'm even trying to be more conscious of now as I make a transition within the space as going from a software engineer into machine learning. I'm trying to apply a lot of the things that I've learned along the way. And so, really, with the crawl, walk, run overall, the name of the show and how I always thought about this is I think about it in phases, right? So, a lot of times as a developer, you have to learn about new types of technologies, new techniques. You're always building something new, right? Not everything that we can follow YouTube tutorials for. A lot of times you have to know how to solve a new problem or innovate in some type of way. And so whenever you are trying to come up against these new technologies and new skills, the crawl, walk, run are the phases that I think about. And so the theme overall is, for each of the shows that each show that I publish, I will always talk about, a new technology or technique within software development, and introduce it in phases. So the crawl phase, which could be, your standard hello world, the walk phase, which could be, getting an app deployed or getting some type of technology deployed, for example. And then the run phase would be like, how, does this look like in production? So that's just kind of giving you a little bit of an overall idea of what that means when I say crawl, walk, run. Um, and this had been inspired by a talk that I gave for our Hacking with the Homies conference, hackingwiththehomies.org. If you're not familiar with it, but I think this was our 2020. Yeah, 2020 we launched this conference. And back when we had our first event, my thing is always getting people into AI, getting developers to pay attention to AI and machine learning in particular. And so I originally created a talk called Crawl Walk Run. It was AI Crawl Walk Run. And at the time, I created a repository for it because usually we're hacking with the homies. We definitely we're like a code first conference, so we always have our speakers to create a GitHub repository where people can find sample code and things of that nature. And so I created my repository for the talk, but I also had this vision that you know I can build out that repository over time to include all types of different examples and things that can be helpful for folks when it comes to picking up new techniques and technologies. And I would say that, my inspiration was when I was learning how to, I guess, advance my skill set earlier on in my career. I felt like there was, I got to a point where I was at a job that it was like I felt like this is my pinnacle, like I finally reached that like that standard ideal company that I'm looking for in all these different ways. And it was a really, really great experience overall. I was there for like almost 3 years. Um, and that wasn't my first role, but I had by that point in time, I understood what I wanted out of a company, and so everything was great, but then I found myself having a hard time with the tech stack and the things that I was trying to learn in order to, I don't know, feel competent alongside the rest of the engineers in the team space. So, anywho, I say all that to say that at this point in time, uh, I feel like it's finally time for me to where I'm at a point where I can help other people, grow and advance. And so that repository that I originally created, I will be updating that alongside this show. So, just like you might have traditional show notes for a podcast, I will also have a repository that is dedicated to the different techniques and technologies that we talk about and covers a lot of the different materials. So that's something to look forward to. Of course, the show is going to be published on pretty much any podcasting platform that you prefer. Um, and I do have a website, which is metadevgirl.com, where, I can make more show notes and blog style guidance and things of that nature. But at this point in time, I am live hosting the shows. For this show, it's once a month. And anybody can follow along in any way that you choose. So now that the long intro's out the way, again, it's the first show, so I just want people to know what to expect. Um, I Today is all about the tips. Like what are those make or break things that really helps you grow and advance, especially as a software developer. And this does not have to just be for people that are junior or entry level, however you like to call yourself. Because there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out what are those skills that they might be missing that can help take them to the next level, especially if you are finding yourself at a point where you're like, I'm trying to go from junior to, mid level or software ones to software two or software two to software three, whatever levels you have within your company. And a part of that is, you know, this self-awareness around how you can be strategic and, really target particular skills and particular areas that will help you grow overall. So I think, the f- I'll give a quick background about myself and how did I get into tech. So I originally went to school for music. I did not know what to do when I graduated from high school because it just really wasn't a lot of opportunities explained to me when I first graduated from high school. Even though I went to a college prep school, even though I was very good at math and science, like people really were like, "Hey, you could be a what they told me I could be a math teacher." And don't get me wrong, like, and especially now at I consider myself to be an educator, of course, um, and I even tried, seeing what it was like to go to an elementary school and volunteer and, see if I could see myself in the classroom if that was the setting for me, and I didn't really identify with that environment back then, and, it just was interesting to me because overall, that was honestly the only thing that people ever recommended, and I didn't know much about what STEM careers were, and so when I graduated from high school, all I knew was, "Okay, I'm good at math, I'm good at music." I had been doing classical voice training for, like, 4 years, so I didn't know what to do next. So, I majored in music and I minored in math. That was my original, study plan. And so I was a vocal performance major, and, I got to a point probably like I was a senior, I think. Well, I was a junior technically when I made this decision. I was, pursuing, vocal performance, but I just found that I was like, I'm looking at all the people around me and I'm like, I'm not as passionate about this as everybody else is. I'm really just getting by on my talent because I never practice. I don't learn my music. Like, it was so many levels to it that was just like I was like, when it's time for us to get out into the real world and I have to like compete with these people that are alongside of me, it's not gonna be any comparison because I could see how much work that everybody else was putting in. And so, that was one thing that I was like, "Okay, let me take a step back." And then I was actually studying music, um, or I should say I was actually studying math as well. And so I was studying math, but I got to let's see. So I took Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3. And then I got to, I forget what they call it now. I think they call it numerical methods. I think that's the class they call it. It's like 5,000 level math class, very theoretical math. I got that far, and then I was like, I don't care about math this much. Like, I love math a lot. I love doing math. Like, calculus was great. Even once I got into linear algebra, differential equations, all that kind of stuff, I enjoyed that. Once they started telling me that I had to prove that a number was an even number, I'm just like, "No, I'm good." So, that was, like, where I was like, "Okay, well, I wanna do something that, like, feeds that interest and that passion I have around math, but this, like, the pure math major wasn't it either." And so, luckily for me, I had joined my sorority in 2011, and around that time I started spending more time around 2 of my sorors that were, in the NSBE chapter at Wayne State, which is the school I was going to, in Detroit. So, the 2, actually, maybe even 3 of my sorority sisters at the time were all engineering majors, different types of engineering majors. And one day somebody was like, how come you not like an engineer? Or like, how can you not study engineering? I'm like, I don't know. What do engineers do? Like, I was like 22 years old, 21, 22 years old. I was like, I don't even know what an engineer does. So, anyways, long story short, I went through talking to different advisors, and for a moment, I was in the industrial engineering department, but then it wasn't technical enough for me in that department in particular, and I transitioned into the mechanical engineering department, which was all fine and dandy. Although a lot of people looked at me crazy when I joined the mechanical engineering department. Like they were looking at me like, "You went from music to engineering. Are you okay?" And also, people were looking at me like with this like look of pity. I felt like not even pity. It was like people were concerned for me. Like, and don't get me wrong, I understand, like, a lot of times people really want to be helpful and they want to see you succeed, and they saw me, quote, unquote, "going down this path" that was difficult or maybe even a path that they haven't seen people traverse before, and so I did get a lot of pushback or a lot of, like, "Are you sure you wanna do that?" Like, as if an engineer wasn't, like, an amazing thing, and as if, like, it was so much of a better idea for me to be studying music, not even knowing how I was gonna make money and pay for the, student loans that I took out for that degree. So anyways, I ended up becoming a mechanical engineering major. Which I do enjoy. I like the hands-on aspect of it, I like problem solving, I liked having a reason for my my math brain, but I did have just so many issues, like, in that, like, first generation college student, like, it was just a lot of systemic issues I went through with the university, and I don't really wanna get into all that, but at the same time, I was in a program where I went to work as, an intern at a coding boot camp, and this was, like, 2014-ish, I think, probably. Yeah, it had to be 2014 because I was, like, 24, and the thing about, coding boot camps back in 2014 is it was still kind of like, in the Bay Area, it was working, but in Detroit, nobody knew what a coding boot camp was, and even then, like, a lot of people were just, like, hesitant towards it. It was still something that was new, um, but I was working for a company that was launching some coding boot camps back then. And that's when I started to get more exposure to just like coding in a pure state, just web development or lightweight software development and what that looks like. So it wasn't my first time taking a programming class, but it was different because I was studying I did like a C. It was supposed to be C and Unix, but I think it ended up being a C plus plus class. So I did a C plus plus class at Wayne State, and it was just like it was terrible. Like, it was a very terrible experience overall. Like, it wasn't anything wrong. It was just and a lot of times people experience this, and I really want people to understand that this is so common. If you never programmed before, especially if you come into it, later on, quote unquote, later on in life, you didn't start programming, when you were a kid, a lot of times, like, it's just an uncomfortable experience because you're not, it's like a lot of new concepts all at once. You're not sure if you're really grasping it. And it's like, this don't really make sense to me, but I'm just trying to make it. And I remember so many people dropped out of that class. And then a lot of us that we stayed in the class after a while, we got to the point where we were beyond being able to withdraw from the class without the professor's permission. So since we couldn't withdraw from the class, like we were stuck. Like the professor literally wouldn't let us withdraw. And they were like, no, you're fine. You guys are fine. You guys are fine. You guys are doing good. Actually, it was the TA. I don't think I ever met the instructor. It was the TA who was teaching our class. And they kept saying, "You're good, you're good, you're good." And I was like, "It don't feel good." So I think long story short, I ended up getting like a B. I got a B plus in that class or like an A minus or something. And I was just like, I will never program ever again. Like, I don't know if I learned something or not. I'm not really sure how that went. And that turned me off from programming altogether. Now, fast forward to when I'm working at this coding boot camp. Now, I had a different experience because I sat in on a class that was, I don't know, they were doing PHP or something like that. And one of the instructors for the class, she was a chapter leader for an organization that I'm still a part of to this day, which is called Girl Develop It. And as her being a chapter leader and being an instructor and everything, um, I remember it was her and another guy was teaching, but I just came up to her after the class and I was just like, this made so much sense to me. Like, I tried learning how to program before and it just felt wrong. Like I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. And then she just was like, everybody feels like that. And I don't know why. It was just like that moment of her saying it made it stick. Even though the professor was trying to tell us the whole time everybody was doing good, everybody was good. I did not want to hear that. I'm like, "Yeah, right, you just want a good review." I don't know. I don't know what I thought. But when it came to just having that one-on-one conversation and she was just like, "Yeah, everybody feels that way." Everybody feels like, this sense of just like not understanding or feeling like they don't have a grasp of what's going on in the beginning. And that's normal. And that just completely changed everything for me. So I had sat in on that class and I thought it was so interesting and I was following along with everything that they were doing. I don't even remember what they were actually teaching. But it was like it had to be a PHP class or something like that. So then I went just crazy into like researching as much as I could. I started like looking at different classes, learning stuff online. You got Code Academy and all that kind of stuff. Back then, we had Code Academy that was pretty fresh. We had Free Code Camp back then, but Free Code Camp was like still very, very new, very beginning in the early phase when I was first starting out as a developer. So I kind of started going down that like self-taught route. And I'm going to get into a couple things, but because some of these are a part of my tips, but I think the background is important, right? So I started out at first just learning what I could online, taking little workshops here and there. And whenever I was taking a workshop, I was always building the projects. Um, I was very serious about it, and I was still a full-time student, and I had like probably one or two part-time jobs. And on top of that, I was like a student leader on campus, and then like I was doing all these things, but I still was so passionate about it. And that's when I knew I found the right spot to be in, because I feel like when you are passionate about something, you're going like that's the thing that you will lose sleep over. That's the thing that'll get you out the bed on a Saturday morning. You know what I mean? That's the thing that would just like push you, that you can't be away from for too long. And that was a very different experience than what I had been experiencing this entire time when I was studying music. And so that was a good sign to me. And I kind of went all in on there. And then just to flash forward through the phases that I've been through so far in my career. So at first I started out self-taught and freelancing, and then I decided I wanted to be a full stack developer, and I decided to take a boot camp even though I already had experience as a programmer. I felt like it was the right step for me, because I needed the accountability and the structure. So I was freelancing on the front end, and then I took a Java boot camp. And after my Java boot camp, I TA for a Java boot camp, like a shorter Java program. I TA'd and co-taught for a program at the same company that I had originally worked for, the same company I took my boot camp at. And then after teaching, or after being a TA, I became an instructor, became a full stack instructor, not a full stack instructor, a front end instructor, doing JavaScript. And then I was an instructor for probably around a year or so. I transitioned into being a program manager or a program director for the same company. So the program that I originally had TA for, it was a Java apprenticeship program back when we had the tech hire program under the Obama administration. We had a Java apprenticeship. So the same program I TA for, I became like a program manager for it. And then after that, I felt like it was time to move on from just freelancing and working on smaller projects and teaching full time, to working as a software developer, working as a software engineer. And so the first full time role I had, that was with a company. I was working for a consulting company, and the consulting company they did like basically I won't say any and everything, but we developed different types of web applications and software for all different clients. So it really depended on what the client wanted. So there was some people that, were just going to build the initial app for them. And there was some people that were like, oh no, we're going to literally go ahead and maintain this long term. We have like regular feature updates that we do, etc. And so in that role, I primarily did Ruby on Rails, which I was not familiar with at the time, but I primarily did Ruby on Rails. And then I moved into like doing some custom WordPress development with PHP. And what else do we do? I don't know. We did a lot of stuff. That's actually the point in time. That's around 2017. So that's actually the point in time where I started gaining my interest in AI and machine learning. Um, and that was something that the company, one of the owners or co-founders, was kinda interested in figuring out, like, how like, what happens if a client wants to come ask us, or, like, is there some way that we can, like, sell services around this? Like, they were just trying to understand it back at that point. So, so I moved on from that role. I went back into freelancing, but this time I was working with startups. So, like, I worked for one company where, they had a Laravel, stack for it was like it's a website that matches, like, people that are applying to jobs in different tech companies. So it's kinda like I can swipe and like and they do matchmaking to help, folks find jobs, and helps, companies find, you know, good employees for their, specifically mostly tech, software developers, and program managers, and product managers, things like that. So I was working, helping them build out their platform. That was a really great experience. And then I actually joined a fellowship that we had here in Detroit called the Hacker Fellows. So now I had a few years of experience and I had a few companies I had worked for. And so when I went into Hacker Fellows, I was very conscious of what I was looking for in a company and what kind of role I was trying to do because I was feeling like, okay, I'm ready to like grow out of that junior, shed my skin, so to speak, and move into just kind of I wanted to in my mind at the time, all I could think was scale. I wanna see something at scale. I think that's why I kept saying it, like, I wanna see a company at scale. I wanna see data at scale, like, it's different when you work in a startup or you work on a small project, um, and, you're like, you never have to worry about your site falling over because too many people are visiting it, but I wanted to see scale, that was my big thing, and I definitely saw scale, and so I ended up I had, like, a good experience with that, and, we had a matchmaking process. I interviewed with, like, I don't know, 10 companies or something. I got, like, 3 or 4 offers, and I got my first, choice, so, I went and worked for this company for about 3 years. And that is really where a lot of the harder growing in my career came from, I think, and that is where a lot of my inspiration around, like, a podcast like this or a lot of the teachings that I do comes from, because I was at that point where I was like, "Okay, I'm not quite mid, I'm still, like it's still certain things that I'm missing to get me over the hump and out of my junior phase, I guess, so to speak, just on the technical side, but I didn't know what to do and how to do it." And then, another thing was I thought it was the environment, right? So this was also a startup, but it was a high-tech startup and was more of like a Bay Area-based startup versus, a very, very, small like, so for example, like, it's one thing when you're, like, the only developer or, like, it's 2 developers versus coming into a company where it was, like, 50 50 software engineers or something like that. So, I could be exaggerating, but that definitely was a company where I think I was, like, in the 90s or something, still within that first 100 employees, but, and I was, like, the first person in my office when it started. I think I was the first, like, junior person that was hired. So I had a lot of experiences there where I had to learn a lot of new things I never heard of before. And apparently it's, popular when you go to these other big like high tech companies. Um, and I just found that there was, I was trying to figure my way through it and I did. And I was getting promoted like every year. Um, and that was even scary to me. And I found that while I was doing this, one of the things that I struggled with was I got to a point where I didn't actually feel like I knew the stuff that I that I had been touching and working on all this time, and so I decided to take a step back, and so that was a long, spill. Now, I'll wrap it up by saying after working there for 3 years where I started out on the API team, which was the thing that I was most familiar with at the time. It was the closest to web development. I started out on the API team, and then, now this was a vehicle connectivity platform, so I ended up going from the API team, which is on one end of the platform, to the, IoT team, and I would never put somebody said this recently, like, I played that on TV. I feel like that about, like, I would not put IoT on my resume, but it's like I played one on TV type of thing. I definitely did that for, like, most of the time I was at that company. I was, an IO on the IoT team, figuring out how to connect vehicles to the internet. And so, then I transitioned back into teaching full time. Now I do still teach. I teach part-time for, some university boot camp programs. I do different modules for, a few different universities and their coding boot camp programs. I teach with a nonprofit, Girl Develop It, um, and I am now really just trying to transition into AI and machine learning, and so, a lot of my goals now are around studying, because not only do I wanna be experienced and proficient in it, but I'm ready to go back to school. Oh, I should have said that, I left when I took my boot camp, I left school to take the boot camp. So, I'm ready to go back to school. I have always wanted to pursue a PhD in um, something engineering related, but I really want to pursue my PhD in computer science and study uh, artificial intelligence. I'm kind of interested, like my main interest now is natural language processing, but we'll see. I'm trying to give myself time to actually explore some other disciplines, but that's kind of where I am now. And so I feel like um I've been able to have a pretty fulfilling career overall and I'm enjoying it. And so um along the way there was different things that I feel like helped me out a lot. And so the first thing I want to start out with again this is going to be 10 tips that can help you advance in your career as a software developer. The first one is when you are picking your language. Um, I think the main thing I want to say here is focus, okay? Now focus, focus, focus because the crazy thing about this field is so many things to focus on. There's so many areas you can go into. Even if you just pick one language to focus on, you could have a plethora of different ways that you could, see your career forming. And so I would say that, and I've definitely had this issue, especially like that 2017 era. I was struggling because I started being like, oh, I want to do AI and machine learning. But I was still advancing as a web developer and web application developer, software engineer in that way. And so it was hard for me because you find yourself trying to learn too many things at the same time and it doesn't work out. It doesn't work out, okay? Now, it might be some people out there and they're just amazing at that and that's fine. But I would say overall it's better for you to focus in one area and don't get distracted because once you learn that core foundation, it's a lot you can do with it. But a lot of times you find that you might be hopping from topic to topic, from discipline to discipline, and you're not establishing your footing anywhere. And so it's kind of like this thing about like a hopscotch type of thing where it's like you hopping from one foot to one foot to one foot. But if you got to stand still for too long, you're going to realize you don't have a solid base, right? So it's okay. I know there's so many things you might want to do and try to think about a specific area that you may want to focus in and build up your skill set within that area. There's a lot of concepts that transfer. So I'll give you an example. Now, if you say you're like, okay, I know JavaScript, so let me focus on JavaScript. First of all, kudos to you for being able to pursue JavaScript in like the 2023, era and beyond because when I wanted to be a full stack engineer, we had Node on the back end, but Node was still like relatively fresh. There was no ecosystem for the full stack JavaScript. Not in the same way that you had the ecosystem for Java, where you have Spring and Spring Boot and all those different frameworks. You had Ruby and you had the Rails framework. You had PHP and you had Laravel. Um, what else? I can name all these different languages. You had C sharp and you had .NET, but JavaScript still really didn't have a lot of that foundation. Even back then, we were just kind of starting to get exposed to React. And people were like, why in the F would I write? Why would I write HTML in my JavaScript? Like that don't make no sense. And now it's like it is the thing. So I wasn't really it wasn't realistic for me at the time, I think, to pursue full stack JavaScript. So I had to learn JavaScript on the front end and I had to learn Java on the back end. And even that was a little bit difficult at the time because those are two languages with two very different paradigms. Not paradigms, but two very different styles. So yeah, focusing is so important. Now, if I take JavaScript as an example, I could learn a framework, one framework. If I learn a framework that uses the model view controller pattern, there's other frameworks that I can always pick up, and they're not gonna have the exact same syntax necessarily, and they might not have the full same implementation, but a lot of the higher level concepts do transfer, okay? So if you go all in and really learn that first framework well and learn all the different components of, being able to take advantage of that framework, then you will be able to transfer that over into other frameworks and even into frameworks in other languages. So even though I learned Spring, I would say the first framework I really, really kind of like had to dig into and use um in my career was Rails, Ruby on Rails. So there was a lot of things I learned through using Ruby on Rails, like for example, database migrations and the CLI integrations that they have, so that you can easily run commands that helps build out your app. So it was a lot of those things that I learned using Rails that I was able to apply to other frameworks whenever I moved into, another realm. Routing, for example, you almost always going to have some type of routing option within your framework. So I'm thinking about backend primarily, but you always going to have some type of routing, right? So I don't necessarily have to know exactly like, okay, well, in React routing, this is React routing. So since it's React routing, that means it's only ever used in React. No, the concept of routing is used across a lot of different web frameworks. So learning it in one framework helps you be able to transfer that knowledge. And then once you have that solid base, it's so much easier to pick up something new, I promise you. But when you do too much like hopscotch at the beginning, then you don't get a good footing and you kind of end up in like a hamster wheel where you're not really getting anywhere and putting in a lot of effort, and you can burn yourself out that way. So that's the first area when it comes to picking your language and picking a topic to focus on. Now the second thing I want to talk about is your learning. Now, knowing yourself when it comes to learning, because everybody is not built for every type of situation, and that's okay. Now, for me, I said I started out taking small workshops and learning stuff online and going that self-directed path. And that was fine for a minute, but then when I got to a point where I knew enough, but I wanted to acquire a new skill and it was a big undertaking, right? I wanted to fully learn back-end development. I realized that with school, with work, with 1,000 different student orgs that I was a part of or leading and my sorority and all these other things, um, I was not like giving myself the time to actually build my skill in back end development. And so I was struggling with that. And I realized, like, okay, the self-directed thing, I know is there's options, I know there's courses online, but honestly, I need to sit in somebody's face every day. I need somebody that's gonna be looking for me to show up. I need, like, somebody that's gonna be looking for me to turn in some assignments. I need some, like, real life interaction. I needed that accountability. And so even though at the time, I wasn't the traditional student going into my boot camp, I felt like that was gonna be the best fit for me. So, you can go through different phases, like the self-directed or just using some, pre-made curriculum or, buying a course or something like that, or even live courses. You might, dabble here and there, but just find what works for you and, be strategic about it, especially when you're at, say, at the beginning or you're at a major like shift or transition, you're trying to learn a big topic or move into another area, take that very, very seriously because you can stunt your growth when you're not intentional about picking the right learning opportunity for you. So when I took my boot camp, I did what you're supposed to do when you take a boot camp. I was not working. I was a full-time boot camp student. Um, and whenever I got out of class and went home that day, I would go and find the same topics that I'd learned in boot camp. I would go home and I liked Treehouse, teamtreehouse.com, I think. I really liked Treehouse back then, and I liked Treehouse for many, many, many years. And so what I would do is during the day, we would go over a certain concept, and then in the evening, I would go and try to find a workshop that was that same topic, and I would walk through it or do the exercises and stuff. And I found that for me, it was helpful to have like 2 to 3 different people explain the exact same thing. And somewhere in the middle, that Venn diagram where they all overlap, that's where my understanding would emerge. So, the first time I heard it from somebody, it might not have made sense to me, and then another person might explain it slightly differently. Again, it's still the same topic though, and I'll maybe be like, "Okay, okay, okay." And then, like, maybe a third time, I watch a YouTube video. So I got my instructor, and I got the treehouse instructor, and then I got a YouTube video, and I got 3 different examples of how to do this one topic. And then when I found that that was a sweet spot for me to really, like, learn, especially concepts that I struggled with. So, when it comes to your learning, being intentional about your learning and picking the right mode of learning for you. Again, everybody's not going to be able to necessarily be ideal with the self-directed route because it takes a lot of discipline. It takes, you nobody's going to say anything if you just go MIA for from your studying for 2 months. That's now if you have that if you have the discipline and you even have the accountability, maybe you have somebody else that you're working along with, then that might work for you. But just be realistic with yourself. The third thing that I want to talk about is I just kind of have this earmarked as teaching. And this is what I'll say. So, this is something that I learned when I was taking a calculus class at Wayne State. We had a program, and the program was actually called Emerging Scholars Program. And it was for the people that are like A students in math, and it was for the people that struggled in math. Like everybody fit there because of how the program was modeled. And one important thing I learned there was not only did we have our lectures, our traditional lectures for class, but we had a lab for our class. And the way the lab worked was that basically, whenever you would go to class, during the week, later on, like twice a week, you would go to a lab session, you would work in a group, and you would get like 10 problems on a page, and you would have to try to solve as many of those problems as you could together with your group. And the goal wasn't really just in solving the problems itself, but the goal was that the actual homework from the lab was at the end of the day, the lab professor would pick 2 or 3 questions that most likely everybody already had a chance to solve, and he would assign those, and we would have to do a write up on those questions. And now this is where the understanding really comes into play because it was one thing to hear it in a lecture. It was another thing to actually work on a problem with, a group and come to a solution. But it was completely different when I was alone by myself in my dorm and I had to explain how I got to the solution. Um and that was a really great learning experience, because again, the reason why people that were really great at math or people that struggled at math could all succeed in this program was because at some point in time, we were going through all these different layers of understanding. And I think I have brought this up under the idea of teaching because what I found was once I was working in my field for quite some time and I was no longer teaching anymore, like not even teaching small classes, not teaching anything at all, I found myself getting rusty. I That was where I started to struggle because I felt like I don't know none of this stuff that I do. Like everything I type all day, every day is kind of going in one ear out the other. That's how I was feeling. And I found that that's when I realized that me, especially as a person, me not having that opportunity to teach was, it was kind of it was like I was having a harder time retaining knowledge. And so There's a lot of different ways that you can get into this, and there's other benefits to teaching as well. But I think from the learning aspect, that's the main aspect to me. When you can re-explain something to somebody, then that's when you know you got it. It's different when you just like, okay, I got it all to work together, but I don't know why it work. That's one level, but then you need to take it a step deeper, especially when you want to advance your expertise. You'll need to understand like why things are the way that they are, and even then you can start to know about trade-offs and pros and cons and all these other things. But it starts with really understanding why, understanding what's happening under the hood. And so I started out with Girl Develop It. I started out as a TA because back then and even now, the benefit of being a TA, it was a voluntary role. I didn't have to be responsible for the materials. It helped me build my confidence as I realized what things I didn't know when I was able to help people out and answer questions for folks that were like, intro level and they this is their first coding class. Um, and the benefit was that I also got to take classes for free. So I was growing my skills and then I was also, practicing what I learned and really solidifying my knowledge set by becoming a TA. And then eventually I did start to teach intro workshops. But you can TA, you can teach small intro workshops, volunteer, teach some kids about coding. You can also say just teach within your study group, right? Even if you don't have a specific opportunity to help out other students that are around you or your peers that are around you, maybe you guys pick, if you have a study group that you work with, pick a time where everybody takes, uh today we're going to have like lightning talks and everybody's going to give a 5-minute talk on one of the concepts that we covered this week, right? That's something very specific and strategic that you can challenge yourself to do as a group. And another way that you could do that, of course, is by writing blogs about things that you learned. You don't just have to blog about like, oh, I'm an expert in this and I have to tell you like how to do the most advanced concepts. No, you can write a blog about something that you figure out, a bug that you learned, that helps out a lot. And when it comes to adding value as a TA, the any extra context that you can provide to people, sometimes even just being the person that can take what the instructor said and make it more plain. Because I found that over the years, I used to be so great at like, I can teach you programming in plain English. That was me. And now it's like, I can't really I get lost in the jargon a little bit, and I do lean on those folks that are gonna be a TA for me who might be, more recent in transitioning or still learning. They have a better sense of when I'm starting to go off the rails and the stuff I'm saying is not really making sense, and that's what I found when I was a TA. I used to when I was a teacher early on, I used to push for my other co-instructors to, like, y'all gotta take it down a level because you got a computer science degree and they don't. So half the stuff you just said, if I don't know what you're talking about, they don't know what you're talking about? So there's that translation level, and sometimes there's just that comfort level that you provide to folks as a TA because, not everybody, especially as a TA, and it can be hard now that we're in a digital environment a lot for a lot of our teaching, but not everybody is going to raise their hand and ask a question in front of everybody else. But if you come and check in on people from time to time, maybe if you're in a Zoom call and you are a TA, send little direct messages to people and see how they're feeling, because when I used to be in the classroom, I could see people's faces, or I could walk around to the desk and actually ask people if they needed help, or I could see that ain't nothing happened on their screen in a long time, and that would be a cue, right? So we don't have those cues anymore necessarily online, but I think something like sending small direct messages to check in on people throughout a session could definitely help as well. You might find that there's some people who are looking for more support, and they can, they feel more comfortable that way. So that's a question from Sashini. So I do want to answer that question about like if you want to be a TA, how can you add value? So the next step or the next topic I want to talk about is building your portfolio. This is so, so, so important, of course. And of course, we always talk about it, but there's lots of levels to it, right? So for me, um, whenever I was taking a class, I never skipped examples. I never skipped labs. I pushed through and made all of those. And in the earlier days, that was what was on my portfolio. Like here's a little example of how I made a custom CSS animation. Now I'm not good at CSS animations, but I had these smaller bite-sized pieces. I freelanced. Freelancing was great for me. What I did was I had a lot. I mean, you'll find that when like if you know how to, I don't know, as soon as you start dabbling in programming, somebody in your family, maybe it's just me, somebody in your family gonna come up to you like, computers, so and so, they need a website for the church and they need a website for the bakery or this, that, and the third, right? So I had a lot of people that were just being recommended to me by word of mouth. And I was definitely terrified to take on those jobs in the beginning because I didn't know if I could do it. But I'm that person that the quote I used to go by back then was like, waiting to develop courage is a form of procrastination. The most successful people take action while they're afraid. That was my quote that I lived by. And I pushed myself through a lot of things that I was afraid to do. And I'm happy for it. So I took on smaller projects and freelancing, and because I was building up at the time, I would charge what I felt comfortable with, or you can do pro bono as well. But just freelancing was a great opportunity to build out my portfolio before I had a professional experience, and then personal projects as well. Of course, like I remember like I built this Lorem Ipsum generator called Detroit Ipsum, and I just really was, like, excited about, building it, even though I struggled. I tried to get it deployed on Heroku, and it took me, like, 6 months because I couldn't get my deployment working, so I just, like, walked away from it, and then, like, months down the line, I finally had the epiphany of what was wrong with my deployment, and that was my first time trying to deploy from to Heroku, and I did, and, yeah, so those different personal projects go a long way as well. And then the fifth thing is your social presence. So the social presence is so, so, so important, y'all. It's so important. And this is the thing that I wish I had done way differently, and that I'm even trying to do differently now, just starting off today. And so when it came to the social presence, um, I got, I got I don't wanna say lucky, but because of the type of job I had and the company I worked for, I naturally developed a lot of LinkedIn connections over time. But I didn't really realize, like, that 500 plus connection thing is, like, still a big deal even nowadays, and, like, how I could leverage more of building my brand and my if you don't wanna call it a brand, but just building my reputation online, because this is what I found. I was very known in my city, in my state, you could say, for teaching and known as a developer, known for organizing events and things of that nature. But as soon as I wanted to start applying to conferences, and becoming like a speaker at different conferences, that's when the struggle came in because I just did not have like they would say like show us a video on YouTube or like link us something that you've done, and I'm like, I don't record my classes. What are you talking about? So that was definitely a big regret for me. And now this even starting this show, that's a different step that I'm taking. I actually live stream, and I'm very I love live streaming. And when it comes to live streaming, you don't if you are interested in something like that, you don't have to be that person that's like doing workshops, right? So, for example, over on Twitch, we have like a live coder community. And with the live coding community, I don't have to really sit here and be the expert and just be showcasing skills. A lot of people are learning and they're just like this is their learning journey and they're, interacting with folks as they're working on something. A lot of people are working on personal projects. And then yes, of course, there are people that are also teaching. But I think the people that are teaching is like a handful compared to the people that are just they're just developing and showing that raw state of what it looks like to be a developer. And so, in the same way that you could, blog about different things that you learned or different issues that you ran into or fixed or, ways that you're growing, you could also like live stream, and, of course, then people know, like, YouTube, that's something I wanted to do for a long time, but I feel like YouTube has to be so much more polished and, you have to have, like, a, I don't know, you have it's produced, right? It's more produced, but because I started out in live streaming and got really comfortable with, like, being on camera and stuff live, um the editing and things like that, that can come with time, but I feel way better because, yes, today, this is actually the official first thing I'm, like, broadcasting and publishing to my YouTube channel for MetaDev Girl, and I'm excited about that, but it has taken me time to feel comfortable and to get out into that realm, but I just wanna encourage you that if you are trying to grow as a developer, even if you're early on, documenting the things that you learn and the thoughts that you have and the way that you approach problems that can help you in getting a job, and that can definitely help you because when people are looking for entry level developers, junior developers, again, however you want to call yourself, they're looking for, can you solve problems? What's your mindset? What's your approach to problem solving? They're not expecting you to come in as an expert, of course. They're expecting that they're going to have to train you, of course, but they're wondering, do you have some fundamental skill sets that they can build on with you? And so, one of the best ways you can really truly showcase that is not going to be in a whiteboard interview where you get 30 minutes and you under pressure. It's going to be, here's the blog that I wrote, here's the challenge I faced, and here's like all the different things I tried, here's the solution. And being able to talk about your thought process about things, or even talk about your thought process about the industry and different trends and new emerging technologies and things. So I want to encourage you, please think about that. Of course, there's other things along with your brand, like your GitHub profile, which lately the GitHub profiles have had a lot more advancements to them. Now you can actually create a README that displays on the homepage of your GitHub account. And I'm going to like make videos and stuff about a lot of this, but I just want people to kind of focus there. Now, I have 5 more tips, but the rest of them, I think they're less they're helpful, but not as deep as some of the others that we talked about, but I think these are all still extremely important and things that you might perspectives you might not have heard before. So, one thing that really was a game changer for me, I was a meetup organizer. I actually was known. Now you gotta think this is when like this was the hot spot of we were having meetups. This is like a 2016, 2017, 2018, really all the way through 2020 until we, couldn't do things in person anymore. I even before I became a developer, when I worked for the coding boot camp, I was the person that used to open everybody's events. We used to let meetups host with us. If it was a tech meetup or like a startup event or something like that, we let people host in our space. So we got a lot of people into our space. And I was that person at my company who always was there to organize and coordinate with the meetup organizers even before I became a developer. And then as I became a developer, I was a meetup organizer, a chapter leader for Girl Develop It. And so that was really, really key because much like teaching or even conference speaking, that ups your profile a lot, especially to recruiters. And there was a lot of times where people were reaching out to me and people were familiar to me. That's how I built up a lot of my reputation in the community, in the tech community, because people knew me for being at events and being at the all the meetups and things like that. So community organizing goes a long way. Um, Participating or volunteering with conferences or unconferences, and those are starting to come back now. But even in online forms, that helps out a lot. So think about that community organizing and taking those leadership roles. Because me, that's how I knew how to do things. Like I said before, I got into tech. I was like running so many orgs on campus, so I was known. I'm known as being in a leadership role, but you don't have to necessarily be the president or the person out front, but you can, really support a community, support an event, and that helps you in getting to know the right people too. And that kind of goes into number 7, which is networking. So, of course, there's like, people have very various feelings about networking, but I just want to say that one thing I learned about is referrals. Referrals are so key. A lot of companies you might want to work for, please consider getting a referral. Okay, if especially if they have a referral program. Like in my experience, I've worked for companies. Once I seen how referrals work behind the scenes, I was like, okay, this makes so much more sense to me. I literally worked in a company where it was like, okay, if we referred an engineer and they got hired, like that was a successful referral and they got hired, then I got a bonus for actually referring them. And there's a lot like people might wonder, okay, well, what's in it for the developer if I ask somebody to give me a referral? Some people might just want to help you, but other people they might honestly actually have like an incentive for referring people that become successful hires. So referrals are really, really, really crucial. But also another thing about referrals is a lot of times you might skip that initial weeding that they do on when it comes to interviews. So a normal person might just apply to a job posting and now you're in the stack with 100 people, and when I'm going through resumes, I may or you may or may not stand out, and if there's any questions about it, you might not pass that first filter. But then coming in as a referral, you would skip that phase and actually go straight to the hiring manager to do the first initial interview. So because you were referred by me into the company, then the company is trusting that okay, this is somebody that's worth talking to. Let's at least talk to them. That was how it was working for us. So referrals can also get you through that first weeding phase where you just might not have the luck of the draw when it comes to your resume standing out in a giant stack. So think about that, and also think about reaching out to people, um, especially in this world where a lot of things are way more digital. LinkedIn, like I'm on LinkedIn right now, live, right? If you see a company you are really truly interested in and you really want to know more about that company, interact with somebody that is an engineer at that company. See if they might answer some questions for you. Connect with people in different organizations or different conferences and things of that nature. But definitely, you can reach out to people. Of course, I'm not saying spam people at all, but I'm saying if I really want to work for this company, then a lot of times, reaching out to a software engineer that works at that company, especially on the team that you're on, you could, make a connection and you could actually find out more information and be able to, kind of go about a different route of getting into that role, uh, or at least getting exposed to that role. I want to talk about 3 more things. So, new skills, how you approach new skills. There's a few things I want people to think about when it comes to new skills. It's not just about the tech skills, but learn about your technologies, okay? Learn about your technology. So, for example, at some point in time, if you are a front end developer, at some point in time, go actually read some of the specs. Read the specs for different properties that you have in CSS. You know, read different rules that you can make in CSS. Read the spec for JavaScript and how different parts of the language works. Yes, it can be very thick, and especially when you're first getting started, um, it might be a bit overwhelming, I'm not gonna lie, but when it comes to growing in your field, I found that, um, the people around me that I was aspiring to be like, who were very skilled and had a lot of expertise in the topics, those were the same people that actually knew what the specs said. They were like, oh, I know. And again, that goes back to what I was saying about know why things are the way that they are, why things work the way that they work. Because if you go back and you think about it and you're like, I know that um, hoisting in JavaScript works this way. And so, or I know that, um, what I want to say, like anonymous functions work this way. You start to learn the inner workings, start to learn the layers underneath, not just the syntax of the language, but how the language works. That can really, really, really like take you to the next level when it comes to advancing, especially if you're a person that's like, I've been junior for so long and I don't know what's the difference, or I've been, a mid-level quote unquote for so long and I really want to bump up to that senior status. Well, you're going to have to understand some senior level concepts, right? And so those are some of the things that I think nobody ever talks about. Like, and then I found that other people around me, maybe they actually went and read the language spec for Java. So they understood, like, oh, okay, this is why you're getting that error that you're getting. Um, and that leads me into industry news and knowledge, which is number 9 for me. I would say industry news and knowledge is so key in our field when it comes to software development. So if you like YouTube, there's a lot of channels that are either the channels for the technologies that you use and follow. There are people who cover different types of topics on various software fields. Like for example, there's people that cover JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks and different tools and techniques that comes out within JavaScript. You might be a Twitter person, you might like podcasts. I found that I was kind of trying to figure out how everybody in my team space was all talking about the same topics. And I'm like, where did they hear that from? And then I found out everybody was all listening to the same damn podcast. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even know people was listening to podcasts. And this was like probably 2019-ish. So 2018. So I was like, I didn't know like everybody here was listening to the same podcast. And I'm just kind of out of the loop. Now I was trying to figure out how where these conversations were starting from. Um, change logs. Change logs are very, very helpful. Don't just skim over stuff like that. Like for me, when I'll give you an example of Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code, that's an IDE that a lot of people use. Whenever you update your Visual Studio Code, the first thing you're going to see is a tab with the change log of what are all the new features that came in with this new version of Visual Studio Code? What bugs did they fix? Like, you're going to see all that kind of information, right? And so that's all stuff that can be really key, crucial, and helpful. Your tech tools, they have blogs a lot of times as well. So they might have a YouTube channel, or they might have Twitter, or they probably have a blog. They probably have a dev blog. So you can look into different dev blogs for the tools that you follow and make sure that you understand the things that are going on in the advancements, because that's how you will stay up to date and even ahead of the curve. So when something comes up in the team space and now they're like, hey, we might want to introduce this into our application, you actually already have a little bit of basis and to participate in that conversation. And then, like I said, the language spec proposals. I think reading the proposals for language specs works as well, because I've started to do this recently. Like, for example, with JavaScript. With JavaScript, you can actually, or with ECMAScript, you can actually go. They have a GitHub repository where you can track all of the new potential features that are being proposed and the different phases that those are in, and you can see more information. You can read the whole specs and everything. So that's something that I highly, highly would recommend to you as well when it comes to just thinking about the industry news and knowledge. There's plenty of other things. I would love to know other things that people have ideas about. Maybe you can even comment on this video if you're watching the video or watching the live stream. But I would say for industry news and knowledge, like videos like YouTube, Twitter accounts, posts, podcasts, change logs, tech tool blogs, and language spec proposals are great places to get information. And last but not least, as I wrap up today, give yourself breathing room and leisure time. And trust me, I was that person that was like, I'm teaching all day and then I got a freelance client, so I'm staying up all night and I'm literally pulling all-nighters and then gotta turn around. Like, I was doing so much, and then I didn't even count all of the other things I was a part of. But first and foremost, especially when you're learning new things, and a lot of times, especially if you're gonna be a junior person, you are learning on the job every day. Like, when I was going home from my last job, my brain hurt every day, okay? And the way I would put it is your brain needs rest to digest, okay? Your brain needs rest to digest. Everybody just say it with me. Your brain needs rest to digest. So, when you have to think about it that way, constantly hammering something and trying to force new things into your brain over and over again is counterproductive. You have to get sleep. You have to actually allow your brain time to digest information, and do what it does best. So, breathing room and leisure time, socializing, spending time doing other things outside of programming, it goes a long way. And a lot of times you can take some things that you may have learned or realized from another area and bring it back in. And I don't know why people feel like programming is not creative. That's like one of the most creative things I know of. A lot of people like that I know a lot of people that are programmers have a background in music. And I think that those are very similar because if you think about it, with music, you don't just randomly do stuff in music. I don't know if people never made music before because people always say music is creative and then they say programming is not creative. The way music works is like in order for it to sound natural, there's scales, right? There's a key, for example. There's a set of notes that you are going to that you have available to you within that key. And if you're using the notes within that key, then things are going to sound harmonious. But if you literally just walk up to a piano and just start trying to throw everything together, it's not necessarily going to sound great. So, the really special skill with musicians is having the ability to have some specific parameters that they have to work within. For example, your key signature, your time signature, knowing which notes you have access to, or whatever the case may be for those that might not be as familiar. So you have all of that as a structure point, and then you create music within those parameters. And I think that that is exactly how programming works. With programming, you have a particular language, you have a particular syntax of the language, right? Specific ways that you have to write things. But then there's like multiple ways to do anything that you want to do. You can argue whether something is the right way or the wrong way, but ultimately there's many different ways that you can accomplish the same things within programming, and I think it's just as creative of a field as something like music. And so when you take the time to give yourself other avenues, other outlets to create, it can only further, advance you when you bring that type of brain back into your programming space. So that is really all I wanted to talk about for today. I hope this was helpful to anyone. I appreciate folks that have been listening, especially with it being a little bit longer than I was planning. But I'm really excited about this. And again, I forgot to put the ticker on for anybody that's watching, but you can follow me on YouTube or Twitch or LinkedIn. I am Meta Dev Girl pretty much everywhere online except on LinkedIn or on GitHub. You will find me as Jessica, Jeseekia. And you can actually go and follow me on metadevgirl.com if you're interested. That's where I will start to post more show notes and things of that nature, and just kind of get everything formed up. So that way, again, if you want to follow along with all of the different topics that we cover through our blog and through the GitHub repository, I'll have all those things for you. So Thank you so much, everybody. I will be back again. Uh, if you are following any of the other shows that I'm running right now, every Thursday afternoon, I am live on LinkedIn. I'm live on Twitch, and possibly live on various YouTube channel as well. And so there's a lot of different topics that we covering, all software engineering based topics. So I'm excited, and I think next week we're going to be on to the Hacking with the Homies launch for that show. So the best way for folks that have been following along and just kind of want to hear everything we have to say is you can always find me here on LinkedIn every around noon on Thursdays, and that's Eastern time. So in the meantime, as we get everything published, please do subscribe and give some feedback on the shows as they're published on your different podcasting platforms. If you can submit any type of comments or make any type of recommendations to other folks that are interested, then we really appreciate it. I want to get this information to as many people as can benefit from it as possible. So I will see you all next week on Thursday or various other spots y'all find me online. Have a good afternoon.